Sierra 1, you are check fire.
I repeat, check fire.
If you take that shot, you bury us all.
Negative. If I don't take this shot, you have nowhere to run.
Forgive me.
Sierra 1, you are check fire. I repeat, check fire. You do not have PID. The voice in her earpiece wasn't just loud, it was panicked. Lieutenant Kincaid's composure had shattered, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of a man watching his command disintegrate. Selena didn't blink. Through the scope of her MK-22, the world was a tunnel of heat shimmers and dust. The crosshairs hovered not over a chaotic insurgent, but over a crumbling stone archway, the structural keystone of the extraction point. Sierra 1, acknowledge, Kincaid screamed, the background noise of automatic fire nearly drowning him out. If you take that shot, you bury us all. Negative, Havoc Actual, Selena whispered. Her heart rate deliberately slowed to 40 beats per minute. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. If I don't take this shot, you have nowhere to run. I will have your badge, Vance. Stand down. She could see the enemy mortar team setting up their coordinates on the ridge above the SEALs. She could see the angle. The SEALs were fixated on the wrong threat. They were 5 seconds away from pink mist. The wind value was 1.5 mils left. Distance, 200 meters. Forgive me, she breathed. Crack. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, the sound tearing through the valley's silence. 72 hours earlier, forward operating base, Iron Horse, Northern Province. The air inside the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Iron Horse smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and aggressive skepticism. Staff Sergeant Selena Ghost Vance stood near the back, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her posture a perfect rigid line. She was the only woman in the room and the only soldier wearing the patch of the Army's 10th Mountain Division. The rest of the room was occupied by Havoc Team, Navy SEALs. They were bearded, relaxed, and radiantly dangerous. They sat on the folding chairs with the sprawling confidence of apex predators. So, a voice drawled from the front row. It was Petty Officer First Class Miller, Havoc's heavy weapons specialist. He didn't turn around, just tilted his head toward the man next to him. We're bringing the school teacher. A ripple of low chuckles moved through the room. Knock it off, said Lieutenant Kincaid. The team leader walked in, throwing a dossier onto the metal table. Kincaid was a man carved from granite and exhaustion, his eyes hard and unreadable. He looked at Selena, his gaze lingering on her rank insignia for a second too long. Vance, you're Sierra 1 for this op. You've read the brief? Yes, sir, Selena said, her voice flat and professional. Extraction of HVT Al-Qadi from the Karak Valley. I provide overwatch from Point Zulu 9. Point Zulu 9 is 2 clicks from the target compound, Kincaid said, crossing his arms. It's high, it's cold, and it's far away. Just how we like our liabilities. The room went quiet. It wasn't friendly banter. It was a statement of fact. I can hold the sector, sir, Selena replied, ignoring the insult. My dope is good out to 1,500 meters with the MAC-22. I don't care about your dope, Sergeant, Kincaid snapped. I care that my team has to worry about a babysitter. This valley is a denial zone. If you get compromised up there, we are not coming up the mountain to get you. You understand? Our priority is the HVT. You are a sensor, nothing more. Understood. Gear check in 10. Kincaid dismissed her, turning his back. Selena moved to the ready room, her movements economical. She opened her Pelican case, revealing the MK-22 advanced sniper rifle. The matte metal felt cold and reassuring. She began to assemble the bolt, checking the headspace. That's a lot of gun for a little girl. Selena didn't look up. It was Miller again, leaning against the lockers, chewing on a toothpick. A few other SEALs were behind him, watching. It's a 338 Norma Mag, Selena said, sliding the bolt home with a satisfying clack. It compensates for the wind drift your 5.56 can't handle. Miller stepped closer, invading her personal space. We handle our own, Vance. We don't need Army precision. We need volume. You see a goat herder with a radio, you call it in. You don't take the shot unless I say so. We don't need a JAG investigation because you got spooked. Selina stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a density to her presence that made her seem larger. She looked Miller in the eye. I don't get spooked, Miller, and I don't miss. Miller scoffed, flicking his toothpick onto her boot. Everyone misses eventually. Just make sure you're not aiming at us when you do. He walked away, shoulder-checking her as he passed. The other SEALs followed, leaving her alone in the hum of the air conditioning. Selina looked down at the toothpick on her boot. She didn't brush it off immediately. She stared at it, letting the anger flare hot and bright for exactly 3 seconds. Then she extinguished it. Anger was a variable she couldn't account for in her ballistics calculator. She picked up her Kestrel weather meter and checked the barometric pressure. The mission was a go. The team didn't want her. The lieutenant expected her to fail. Good, she thought, shouldering her ruck. They won't be looking at me. They'll be looking at the target. And that was exactly where she needed to be. The insertion was a violent transition from noise to silence. One moment, the MH-60 Blackhawk was a screaming mechanical banshee, its rotors churning the dry air of the valley floor. The next, it banked hard and vanished over the ridge, leaving the darkness to swallow Havoc team whole. Staff Sergeant Selina Vance adjusted the padded straps of her ruck, feeling the 60 pounds of gear settle onto her hips. The M22 was strapped to the side of her pack, a heavy, awkward counterweight, while her M4 carbine hung ready across her chest. Move! Kincaid's voice crackled in her earpiece. It wasn't a whisper. It was a command stripped of any patience. The SEALs moved out instantly. They didn't walk. They surged. Under the milky green glow of her PBS 31 night vision goggles, the 6 men looked like extraterrestrial predators. Their GPN VG-18 panoramic goggles, the 4-tubed spider eyes, gave them a wider field of view than her standard binoculars. They moved with a fluid aggression, navigating the treacherous scree and shale of the valley floor as if they were on a paved track. Selina knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a tactical movement. It was a hazing. They were pushing the pace to a sprint, testing the army legs of the woman they had been forced to bring along. They wanted her to lag behind. They wanted her to gasp over the comms, to ask for a halt, to prove them right. She clamped her mouth shut, breathing strictly through her nose to regulate her heart rate. The air in the Carrick Valley was thin and biting, scraping against her throat like sandpaper. The terrain was a nightmare of vertical ascents and loose rock, the kind of ground that shredded boots and twisted ankles. 10 minutes in, her thighs burned. The sweat began to pool at the base of her spine, freezing instantly against the cold night air. 20 minutes. The incline steepened to 45 degrees. Havoc team didn't slow down. Selina fixed her gaze on the boots of the man in front of her, Petty Officer Miller. He was huge, carrying the heavy belt-fed MK-48 machine gun, yet he moved with surprising lightness. Selina matched his stride, step for step. Every time he vaulted a rock, she vaulted it. Every time he slid down a wash, she surfed the gravel right behind him. She wasn't just enduring, she was calculating. The SEALs were sprinters built for the violence of action, kicking doors in overwhelming spaces. Selina was a sniper. Her entire existence was built on endurance, on lying in the mud for 3 days for a single second of work. They could run up the mountain, but she could live on it. The path narrowed, hugging the side of a sheer cliff drop-off. The drop into the ravine below was a black void in her NVGs. Suddenly, the rhythm broke. Miller stepped on a slab of slate that looked solid, but was resting on nothing but dust. The rock gave way with a sickening grind. Miller's heavy frame pitched backward, his center of gravity shifting over the edge of the trail. His arms flailed, the heavy machine gun swinging wide, threatening to smash against the cliff face. A noise that would echo like a gunshot in the silent valley. Selina didn't think. She didn't gasp. She lunged. She dropped her center of gravity and drove her shoulder into Miller's lower back, pinning him against the uphill slope. Her left hand shot out, grabbing the forend of his falling machine gun inches before it struck the stone. For a heartbeat, they were frozen, Miller teetering on one foot, Selina acting as the human wedge, keeping him from tumbling into the dark or waking up the entire valley. The only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of the men and the soft clink of a buckle settling. Miller regained his footing, his boots scrabbling for purchase. He looked back at her. Under the quad tubes of his NVGs, his face was invisible, but his body language radiated shock. He had expected the tourist to be 50 meters back, gasping for air. Instead, she was right on his heels, saving him from a catastrophic error. Selena released him and stepped back, checking her sector. She didn't say a word. She didn't wait for a thank you. Havoc 2, status? Kincaid's voice cut through the comms, sharp and suspicious. He was at the point, 30 meters ahead. Miller hesitated. The silence stretched for 2 seconds. Clear, actual, Miller replied, his voice gruff. Just loose footing, continuing movement. He didn't mention her. Selena didn't expect him to. In their world, admitting she saved him was worse than the fall itself. The team resumed the climb, but the pace shifted. It wasn't slower, but the frantic, hazing edge was gone. They moved with a tighter focus. An hour later, they reached the crest of the ridge. This was the separation point. Below them, nestled in the valley floor, lay the target village, a cluster of mud brick compounds sleeping under the starlight. Hold, Kincaid signaled. The team took a knee. Kincaid moved to Selena. He pointed a gloved finger toward a jagged outcropping of rock further up the mountain, isolated and exposed to the wind. Zulu 9, Kincaid whispered. That's your hole. You set up, you establish comms, and you stay off the net unless you see the HVT running. Copy, Selena whispered back. Kincaid leaned in, his face mask inches from hers. And Vance, don't fall asleep up there. If things go sideways down here, the last thing I need is to be waiting on a wake-up call. I don't sleep on the job, Lieutenant. We'll see. Kincaid signaled his team. Havoc slipped over the edge, descending toward the village like smoke. Selena watched them go, her jaw set. They were heading into the fight. She was heading into the cold. She turned and began the solo climb to her perch, the weight of the rifle digging into her shoulder. They thought the hard part was over. They were wrong. The weight was always the hardest part. Dawn broke over the Carrick Valley, not with a gentle light, but with a harsh, revealing glare. The transition was abrupt. The freezing purple shadows of the night evaporated, replaced instantly by a relentless, baking heat that radiated off the limestone. Staff Sergeant Selena Vance lay prone in the dust of Zulu 9, a shallow depression in the rock face that offered a panoramic view of the valley floor. She had spent the last hour constructing her hide. It wasn't a fortress. It was a magic trick. She had draped a lightweight mesh veil over her head and the rifle, dusting it with local vegetation and crushed shale to break up the hard geometric lines of the human form. To an observer 5 meters away, she was just another pile of scree. She pressed her eye to the rubber cup of her spotting scope, dialing the magnification back to scan the village of Almere. Havoc Actual, Sierra 1. Set and established, she whispered into her comms. The microphone was tucked inside her veil, muffling the sound. Copy, Sierra, Kincaid's voice came back, crackling with static. Hold tight. We are staging at the layup point, waiting for darkness to breach. The waiting began. This was the sniper's purgatory. The SEALs were down there in the shadows of a dried riverbed, likely running through their breach plan, checking gear, cracking silent jokes, reinforcing their brotherhood. Up here, Selena was alone with the physics of the earth. The heat intensified. Sweat trickled down her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she couldn't wipe it away. Movement was death. A single fly buzzed incessantly around her ear, landing on the sweat of her neck. She forced herself to ignore it, slowing her breathing to a meditative rhythm. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Through the high-definition glass of her scope, the village looked like a model set. She watched the pattern of life, the daily rhythm of the locals. A woman hung laundry on a rooftop. An old man sat by a well smoking a pipe. A donkey cart trundled down the main thoroughfare. It looked normal. It looked peaceful. But Selena's gut twisted. It was too clean. She shifted her focus to the rooftops. The intel briefing had identified 3 likely lookout positions. They were empty. That wasn't unusual for midday, but it nagged at her. Then she saw it. It was a flash lasting less than 1/10 of a second, a glint of sunlight reflecting off glass. It came from the minaret of the mosque on the eastern edge of the town, a location strictly off-limits to coalition fire under the rules of engagement. Selena narrowed her eyes, dialing up the magnification. The heat mirage, the shimmering boil of the air, distorted the image, making straight lines dance like snakes. She waited, her finger hovering over the focus knob. There, deep in the shadows of the minaret's balcony, something moved. It wasn't a bird. It was the distinct angular shape of a tripod leg being adjusted. Someone was setting up a position that overlooked the SEAL's intended entry route. "Havoc Actual, Sierra 1, she murmured. "I have a possible contact in the mosque minaret. Sector East. Looks like optics." There was a pause. "Copy, Sierra. Do you have a weapon visible?" "Negative. Just a glint in movement. Can't confirm system." "Then keep watching," Kincaid replied, his tone dismissive. "It's a mosque. Unless you see a muzzle, it's a no-go. Don't clutter the net with ghosts." Selena clenched her jaw. Ghosts. She returned to her scan, sweeping the streets. She looked for the dogs. Stray dogs were everywhere in this region. There were none. She looked for the trash piles. They were there. Then she looked for the children. She pulled her face away from the scope for a second, blinking the sweat out of her eyes. She looked back in. It was 1400 hours. The sun was high. Usually kids would be running errands, playing soccer in the dirt alleys, or harassing the livestock. The streets were devoid of anyone under the age of 18. A chill that had nothing to do with the altitude ran down her spine. The absence of children was the universal sign of an impending event. The locals knew something was coming. They had scrubbed the kill zone. "Havoc Actual," Selena tried again, her voice urgent. "Be advised, I am reading a negative pattern of life on the younger population. No kids in the AO. I repeat, 0 children visible." "Copy, Sierra," Kincaid said, sounding distracted. "We're 2 mics from movement. Keep eyes on the HVT's compound. We're going in." He wasn't listening. He was focused on the breach, on the violence he could control. He didn't care about the subtle emptiness of the street. Selena adjusted the parallax on her scope, sharpening the image of the empty alleyway where the SEALs would soon be walking. The silence of the village wasn't peace. It was a held breath. She chambered around in the Yank 22, the bolt action feeling heavy and final. "You're walking into a bruise," she whispered to herself, the wind stealing the words. The sun had finally bled out of the sky, leaving the Carrick Valley in a deep, suffocating shade of indigo. Through the thermal mode of her optics, the village of Almere transformed into a monochrome landscape of cool blues and grays. The only heat signatures were the stray goats huddled in pens and the glowing white forms of Havoc Team moving through the alleyways like ghosts. "Stacking?" Kincaid's voice was a whisper in her ear, distorted by a sudden burst of static. Selena adjusted the squelch on her radio. The interference was new, a rhythmic clicking sound that cut through the silence. It wasn't natural atmospheric noise. It felt purposeful. "Havoc Actual, Sierra 1, Selena said softly. "I'm getting comms interference. Check your frequency hop." "Copy," Kincaid replied, his voice tight. "We're at the breach point. Maintain silence." Selena watched through her scope. She could see the team clustered at the heavy wooden gate of the target compound. The point man, Miller, placed a strip charge on the hinges. The IR lasers from their rifles sliced through the dusty air, invisible to the naked eye, but blindingly bright under night vision. 3, 2, 1. A flash of white heat bloomed on the thermal imager. The sound reached her 2 seconds later, a dull, muffled thud that didn't even echo. The gate swung inward. The SEALs flowed into the courtyard with practiced violence. It was a ballet of aggression. They swept left, then right, clearing the fatal funnel in seconds. "Clear left, clear right. Moving to structure," a SEAL reported. Selena scanned the perimeter walls. Nothing. No guards on the roof. No movement in the windows. The compound was asleep, or it was pretending to be. The team kicked the main door. Another flashbang went off inside. "Jackpot!" Miller's voice came over the net, surprisingly loud. "We have the HVT. He's sitting right here." Selena frowned, pressing the optic cup harder against her eye. "Sitting there?" "Status?" Kincaid barked. "Male, military age, positive ID on Al-Qadi, Miller said. He's unarmed, drinking tea. He didn't even flinch when we blew the door. A cold knot tightened in Selena's stomach. High-value targets didn't drink tea while Tier 1 operators kicked down their doors. They ran. They fought. They detonated suicide vests. They didn't wait. Secure him, Kincaid ordered. Prep for exfil. That was too easy. Actual, this feels wrong, Selena broke in. Her voice was steady, but her pulse hammered against the stock of her rifle. No resistance, no sentries, the lack of children earlier, now a compliant HVT? It's a stage play, sir. I have the package, Sierra, Kincaid snapped. We are not leaving empty-handed because you have a bad feeling. Scan the egress route. Selena scanned. She swept the scope back toward the minaret she had marked earlier. The heat signature was gone. She swept the rooftops overlooking the courtyard. There, on a flat roof across the street, a single heat signature appeared. It popped up from behind a parapet, lingered for a second, and vanished. It wasn't a shooter. It was a spotter. Contact front, Selena hissed. Roof to your 12 o'clock. Spotter. I don't see anything, Miller argued. Street is cold. He ducked. He's marking you, Selena insisted. Sir, the HVT is the bait. You're in a kill box. Secure the prisoner, Kincaid yelled over the comms, ignoring her. We are moving to exfil Alpha. Sierra, stop ghost hunting and cover the exit. Selena watched helplessly as the team dragged the HVT out of the building and into the exposed courtyard. They were celebrating the win. They had the prize. They were thinking about the flight home. But Selena wasn't looking at the prize. She was looking at the geometry of the courtyard. High walls on 3 sides, 1 exit. The static in her ears spiked, turning into a high-pitched squeal that made her wince. It was a jamming signal. Powerful. Local. Havoc, comms check, she shouted. Silence. Havoc, actual, do you copy? Static. Down in the village, the team was moving toward the gate. They were cut off. They couldn't hear her, and on the ridges above them, the shadows began to move. The silence of the valley didn't break. It shattered. It started with the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade, followed instantly by a thunderous detonation that shook the ground beneath Selena's chest. The wooden gate the SEALs had just breached disintegrated in a cloud of splinters and black smoke. Contact! Contact all sides! Miller's voice screamed over the radio, cutting through the static with raw urgency. From her vantage point at Zulu 9, Selena watched the ambush unfold with terrifying clarity. The village of Almere lit up like a switchboard. Muzzle flashes sparkled from the rooftops to the north, east, and west. The enemy had established a classic L-shaped ambush, using the high walls of the canyon to trap Havoc team in the courtyard. Down below, the SEALs were scrambling. The thermal optics showed them diving behind a low stone trough and the wreckage of the gate. They were returning fire, short, controlled bursts of green laser light lashing out against the dark, but they were overwhelmed. Taking effective fire from the North Ridge, Kincaid yelled. Sierra 1, do you have eyes on? Selena swept her scope toward the North Ridge. She didn't just see shooters, she saw a weapon system that made her blood run cold. Set up in a fortified bunker of sandbags and rock was a DAHK, a Soviet-era 12.7mm heavy machine gun. Thump, 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 thump. The heavy rounds hammered the courtyard walls, punching through the mud bricks as if they were wet cardboard. The DSHK wasn't just suppressing the SEALs, it was dismantling their cover piece by piece. Havoc, be advised, you have a heavy machine gun on the North Ridge, grid 4429, Selena called out, adjusting her turret. I'm engaging. She exhaled, finding the rhythm of her heart. Distance, 1,280 meters. Wind, full value right to left. She held 2.5 mils into the wind and squeezed. The MK-22 bucked. Through the scope, she saw a puff of dust bloom on the sandbags next to the DSHK. A near miss. The gunner didn't even flinch. He kept pouring fire into the courtyard. Havoc, I cannot suppress. The angle is too shallow. Selena cursed. The lip of the bunker protected the gunner from her elevation. Forget the sniper, Kincaid shouted. Basher 2-1, this is Havoc actual. We are pinned, requesting immediate CAS, danger close. The radio crackled with the voice of the pilot circling at 20,000 feet. Havoc, this is Basher. Negative on the CAS. We are spiking SA-7 radar locks in the valley. The air is denied until we clear the SAMs. You are on your own. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. On your own. Selena watched as an RPG struck the wall inches above Miller's head, showering him with debris. The SEALs were huddled tight, their firing arcs shrinking. They were trapped. But then, Selena noticed something. She pulled her eye back from the specific threats and looked at the whole picture. The tracer fire from the enemy positions was intense, but it wasn't surrounding them completely. The DSHK was hammering the north wall. The riflemen were pouring fire from the east. But the south? The south alleyway, a narrow, shadowed choke point leading out of the village, was completely untouched. The enemy wasn't trying to kill them in the courtyard. The volume of fire was too high, yet the accuracy was strangely poor. They were pushing them. Like sheepdogs herding a flock, the tracer rounds were corralling Havoc Team toward the only safe piece of cover, the South Alley. A memory flashed in Selena's mind. Basra 4 years ago. A similar setup. A team pushed into a safe lane that turned out to be a command-detonated IED field. She had watched 6 men vanish in a pink mist because she hadn't seen the pattern in time. Her breath hitched. She could feel the panic rising, the ghost of that failure clawing at her throat. Not again. She forced the memory down, locking it in a box. She looked at the South Alley. It was too inviting. It led directly under a massive, rusted water tower that stood on spindly steel legs. Havoc Actual, do not move south, Selena screamed into the comms, breaking protocol. I repeat, do not take the South Alley. It's our only exit, Sierra. Kincaid's voice was strained. We can't stay here. We're getting chewed up. Moving to the South Alley in 5. It's a funnel, Kincaid. They are hurting you. We don't have a choice. Selena watched the SEALs stack up, preparing to run the gauntlet toward the alley. The DSHK gunner shifted his fire, walking the rounds closer to their feet, stinging them, urging them to move. They were 5 seconds away from running into the kill zone. The enemy was waiting for them to bundle into that narrow street before triggering whatever hell waited beneath that water tower. Selena looked at the water tower. She looked at the rusted steel support leg closest to the alley. She looked at her ballistic computer. She couldn't kill all the insurgents. She couldn't stop the DSHK. But she could change the battlefield. Forgive me, she whispered. She shifted her aim away from the enemy and settled her crosshairs on the structural support of the water tower. Moving in 3, 2. Kincaid's voice was a jagged rasp in Selena's earpiece. Down in the courtyard, the 6 men of Havoc Team coiled like springs. They were desperate. The heavy machine gun fire from the north was chewing through the last of their cover. The South Alley, the shadowed, inviting exit, was their only lifeline. Selena didn't look at the men. She looked at the rust. The water tower was a relic of a failed aid project, a massive steel tank perched on 4 corroded legs. It loomed directly over the entrance to the South Alley. The leg closest to the courtyard wall was pitted with oxidation, a weak point waiting for a catalyst. She didn't have time to explain the geometry of the ambush. She didn't have time to argue that the silence in the South Alley was a lie. She had time for one trigger pull. Check fire! Check fire! Kincaid screamed as he prepared to sprint. Selena tuned him out. The world shrank down to the mil dots in her reticle. She ignored the enemy DSHK. She ignored the tracers. She settled the crosshairs on the structural knee of the rusted support leg. If I'm wrong, I bury them. If I'm right, they'll hate me. She exhaled, emptying her lungs until she was a vacuum. Crack. The Mk-22 jumped against her shoulder, the recoil significantly sharper than a standard rifle. The 300-grain .338 projectile crossed the 1,200 meters in under 2 seconds. It struck the steel leg with the force of a freight train. The metal, already weakened by years of neglect, didn't just bend, it sheared. A shower of sparks and rust exploded outward. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The tower groaned, a deep metallic screech that cut through the gunfire like a dying animal. Then gravity took over. Watch out! Above you! Miller yelled. The massive tank listed to the right, its center of gravity shifting past the point of no return. With a thunderous crash that shook the valley floor, the tower toppled. It slammed directly into the mouth of the south alley, the exact spot where the SEALs would have been 5 seconds later. Tons of steel, water, and concrete debris choked the exit, creating an impenetrable wall of dust and twisted metal. The safe route was gone. "Contact! Blue on blue! Taking fire from high angle!" Kincaid roared, his voice thick with dust and fury. "Sierra 1, cease fire! You just dropped a damn building on us." Selena cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. She kept her eye on the scope. "Negative, Havoc. I closed the door." "You blocked our exit. We are trapped." Kincaid sounded ready to kill her himself. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Before Selena could answer, the trap revealed itself. Frustrated that their prey hadn't entered the kill zone, the enemy triggered the ambush anyway. Boom! The entire length of the south alley, the space behind the fallen tower where the SEALs would have been running, erupted. A daisy chain of IEDs buried under the dirt road detonated in a ripple of fire and earth. The blast wave slammed against the other side of the fallen water tower, rattling the debris but leaving the SEALs in the courtyard untouched. The silence that followed was heavy. If the tower hadn't fallen, Havoc team would be vaporized. "Havoc actual," Selena said, her voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Be advised, IEDs detonated in the south alley. You are clear of the blast." There was no immediate response. The radio was filled with the heavy breathing of men who had just looked death in the face and realized it blinked. "Copy, Sierra," Kincaid said finally. His voice was different now. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp shock. We are secure, but we're stuck. We can't go south. North is a kill zone." "I know," Selena replied. She shifted her position, wincing as a cramp seized her shoulder. "You're stuck, but you're alive." "They know where you are now," Miller cut in. "That shot came from Zulu 9. You just rang the dinner bell." Selena looked up from her scope. He was right. By taking the shot at the tower, she had given up her concealment. The muzzle flash, the dust kick-up. It was a beacon. The DSHK on the north ridge stopped firing at the courtyard. The turret slowly, deliberately traversed upward. The barrel was pointing at her. "Get ready to move, Havoc," Selena said, reaching for her smoke grenades. "I'm about to become the priority target." The physics of a 12.7mm round are terrifying. It doesn't just pierce, it demolishes. When the DSHK on the North Ridge opened up on Zulu 9, the rock face around Selena didn't chip. It exploded. Selena curled into the fetal position behind the lip of her hide as the world turned into a storm of pulverized limestone and screaming metal. The sound was a physical assault, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that vibrated through her chest cavity, rattling her teeth. "Sierra, get your head down," Kincaid yelled over the radio, but his voice sounded miles away. She couldn't move. The enemy gunner had her range dialed perfectly. Rounds were impacting inches from her boots, inches from her head. The Overwatch position, once her sanctuary, had become a coffin. Move or die, move or die. She forced herself to uncurl, reaching for the bolt of the MK-22. Her suppressor was sizzling hot, radiating a heat mirage that rippled the air in front of her scope, distorting the view. She was blind, deafened, and pinned. A round struck the granite ledge 6 inches from her face. The rock shattered. A jagged shard of stone, propelled with the velocity of a bullet, sliced through the sleeve of her uniform and tore into her left tricep. Selena gasped, the air seizing in her lungs. The pain was white-hot and immediate, like a branding iron pressed against the muscle. Warm blood began to soak the fabric, slick and sticky. "I'm hit," she gritted out, the words barely audible. "Sierra, status," Miller's voice. "Superficial," she lied. It wasn't superficial. Her left arm, her support arm, was throbbing with a dull, sickening ache that threatened to make her pass out. But she didn't have time for shock. If she didn't kill that gunner, the SEALs would never get out of the courtyard. They were stuck between a blocked exit and a kill zone. She was the only thing drawing the fire away from them. Selena used her right hand to drag the rifle back into position. She couldn't use her left arm to stabilize the stock properly. The muzzle refused to fire. She jammed the fore end of the rifle onto a sandbag, using the weight of the weapon to hold it steady. She pressed her eye to the scope. The reticle was dancing. Her heartbeat was hammering the rifle, making the crosshairs jump with every pulse. Breathe. Just breathe. She saw the muzzle flash of the DSHK. The gunner was confident now. He was standing tall behind the weapon, pouring fire onto her ridge, thinking he had won. He stopped traversing, locking the gun in place to finish her off. That was his mistake. Stationary targets are dead targets. Selena bit down on her lip until she tasted blood, using the sharp pain to override the throbbing in her arm. She timed the rhythm of the heavy machine gun. Thump, thump, thump. She exhaled, forcing her body to go limp, ignoring the instinct to flinch as the rounds cracked overhead. She dialed 0.4 mils down to account for the angle. The gunner paused to adjust his belt. Now! Selena squeezed the trigger. The M22 recoiled, slamming into her bruised shoulder. The pain in her left arm flared brilliantly, but she kept her eye open. Through the scope, she saw the DSHK gunner's head snap back violently. A cloud of pink mist vaporized behind him. He crumpled, his hands sliding off the spade grips. The heavy barrel pointed skyward, silent. "Target down," Selena whispered, her voice raspy. North ridge suppressed. She slumped back against the rock wall, clutching her bleeding arm. The silence that followed was ringing and unnatural. "Sierra, say again?" Kincaid asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "Did you clear the heavy?" "Target destroyed," Selena repeated, closing her eyes for a second to fight off the dizziness. "You have a window, Havoc. Move." "Copy that. Moving." Down in the valley, the SEALs broke from their cover. Without the DSHK hammering them, they could move. They scrambled over the rubble of the fallen water tower, using the dust cloud Selena had created as a screen. They were escaping. She had done her job, but as she tried to push herself up to check her perimeter, her left arm gave way. She collapsed back into the dust, her breath coming in ragged gas. The DSHK was gone, but the gunfire hadn't stopped. It was getting closer. The infantry was moving up the slope. They weren't interested in the SEALs anymore. They were coming for the sniper who had humiliated them. The distance between life and death was closing rapidly. It was measured in meters now, not kilometers. Selena scrambled backward, her boots scraping against the loose shale. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side, a dead weight of throbbing pain. She abandoned the .22. The heavy rifle had done its job. Now it was just an anchor. She pulled the bolt from the receiver and shoved it into her dump pouch, rendering the weapon useless to the enemy, and drew her Glock 19. Below her, the slope was alive with movement. The enemy fighters, realizing the sniper was wounded and alone, were surging up the goat trails. She could hear their shouting, the guttural commands echoing off the canyon walls. They were 200 meters out, then 100. "Havoc! Status?" She gasped into the radio, her voice ragged. "We are at the secondary extraction point," Kincaid's voice came back, breathless but clear. "Pop smoke, Sierra. We're waiting on the bird." "Negative," Selena replied, leaning against a boulder to steady her pistol. "I have infantry closing on Zulu 9. I am combat. Ineffective. You get on that bird. Do not wait for me." "Say again." "I said go!" Selena shouted, firing 2 rounds at a silhouette cresting the ridge. "I'm buying you time. Get out." Down in the valley, Lieutenant Kincaid paused. He was kneeling behind the wreckage of the water tower, the dust still settling around him. For the first time, he looked back at the path they had almost taken. The south alley was a crater. The ground was churned earth, black and smoking. If Selena hadn't dropped the tower, if she hadn't forced them to stop, Havoc team would be spread across that road in pieces. Kincaid looked up at the ridge. He saw the solitary puff of dust where Selena was fighting. He realized then that the liability wasn't a tourist. She was the reason he was still breathing. "Havoc to Basher," Kincaid keyed his radio, his voice dropping an octave. "Change of mission. We are not, I repeat, not leaving without Sierra 1. Actual, we have a fuel window," the pilot argued. "I don't care about your fuel. Get us to the ridge." Kincaid turned to his team. Miller, grab the saw. We're going up. Up? Miller looked at the steep ascent, then at the smoking crater behind them. He nodded, his face grim. She blocked the IEDs, didn't she? Yeah, Kincaid said. She did. Up at Zulu 9, Selena heard the change in the plan and felt a surge of panic. Kincaid, don't be stupid. You can't climb this face under fire. We're not climbing, Vance, Kincaid replied. Start moving east. There's a saddle in the ridge. Meet us there. If you stop, you die. Selena gritted her teeth. Moving meant leaving her cover. It meant exposing herself to the fighters swarming the slope. But staying meant capture, and capture meant a video camera and a knife. She grabbed an M18 smoke grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, and hurled it down the slope toward the advancing voices. A thick cloud of yellow smoke billowed out, obscuring the view. Moving, she grunted. She pushed herself off the rock. The pain in her arm was blinding, sending white sparks across her vision with every step. She stumbled, sliding on the gravel, but caught herself with her good hand. She ran in a crouch, staying low, moving along the spine of the ridge toward the east saddle. Bullets zipped past her, snapping like angry insects. One kicked up dirt into her face, blinding her for a second. She wiped her eyes and kept moving. Left foot, right foot. Don't fall. She could hear the heavy thump, thump, thump of the Black Hawk helicopter approaching from the valley floor. It was a beautiful, terrifying sound. She reached the saddle, a narrow, flat bridge of rock connecting two peaks. It was exposed, windswept, and completely devoid of cover. I'm at the saddle, she yelled. Where are you? Look down, Kincaid said. Selena looked over the edge. The Black Hawk was rising out of the valley like a dark angel, its rotors kicking up a storm of dust. It hovered 50 feet below the saddle. The pilots, fighting the crosswinds. The side doors were open. Kincaid and Miller were leaning out, weapons scanning. But the ridge was too narrow. The helicopter couldn't land. The rotors would strike the rock wall if they got any closer. Basher can't set down, the pilot screamed over the net. Too tight. We have to hover. Selena looked at the gap between the ledge and the helicopter. It was too far to jump. The hoist, Kincaid yelled, unclipping the steel cable from the winch. Vance, we're dropping the hook. You have to clip in. Behind Selena, the yellow smoke was thinning. The enemy fighters emerged from the haze, spotting her instantly. The world was a violent swirl of dust and noise. The MH-60 Black Hawk hung in the air 10 meters off the edge of the saddle, its rotors chopping the thin mountain air with a deafening rhythm. Selena crouched behind a shallow lip of rock, pressing her wounded arm against her chest. Bullets chipped away at her cover, sending stinging shards of stone into her face. The enemy fighters were 50 meters away and sprinting. They knew the helicopter was vulnerable. They smelled blood. Drop the hook! Drop the hook! Kincaid's voice tore through the headset. The steel cable of the hoist unspooled from the bird, swinging wildly in the rotor wash. The heavy metal hook danced in the air, 5 feet out of Selena's reach. She lunged for it, her boots slipping on the scree, but the wind whipped it away. She tried to reach out with her left hand, but the limb was dead weight. She gasped, stumbling back as a round cracked past her ear. She couldn't do it. She couldn't manipulate the carabiner and hold her position with one arm. I can't hook up, she screamed. Wave off. Get out of here. In the open door of the Black Hawk, Petty Officer Miller watched her struggle. He saw the blood soaking her uniform. He saw the enemy muzzle flashes closing in. He looked at the pilot, then at the cable. He didn't ask for permission. Miller grabbed the hoist cable with a gloved hand, clipped his safety line into the hook, and stepped off the skid. Miller, what are you doing? Kincaid yelled. Miller ignored him. He rode the cable down, sliding fast, his boots hitting the rock ledge of the saddle with a heavy thud right next to Selena. He didn't crouch. He stood tall, leveling his MK-48 machine gun at the advancing enemy, unleashing a long, roaring burst of fire that forced the fighters to dive for cover. Get up, Vance! Miller bellowed, grabbing her vest with his free hand. You idiot! Selena shouted, stumbling to her feet. You're going to get killed! Shut up and clip in! Miller dropped the machine gun to its sling and grabbed the carabiner on Selena's extraction harness. His hands were steady, despite the rounds impacting the rock around their feet. He slammed the gate of the carabiner shut, locking her to the hoist, then clipped his own D-ring onto the same hook. They were tethered together. "Basher, pull! Pull! Pull!" Miller screamed into his mic. The winch motor whined. The cable went taut. Selena felt her feet leave the ground. The sensation was sickening, a sudden lurch into emptiness. She swung out over the abyss, dangling thousands of feet above the valley floor. The wind roared in her ears, spinning them slowly. Below them, the ridge erupted. The enemy fighters reached the edge of the saddle, firing wildly at the ascending figures. Daka, daka, daka. The door gunner on the Black Hawk opened up with the M1 and 34 minigun. A stream of red tracers poured from the helicopter like a fire hose, chewing up the ridgeline. The sound was a continuous, tearing roar that drowned out everything else. Rock and earth exploded where Selena had been standing seconds ago. Selena gripped Miller's plate carrier with her good hand, burying her face in his shoulder to shield herself from the rotor wash. Miller held her tight, his body positioning, blocking the angle of fire from the ground. "I got you," he shouted over the noise, his voice surprisingly calm. "Hang on." They rose steadily, inching toward the open door. The vibration of the cable hummed through Selena's bones. She looked down one last time. The water tower lay like a broken giant in the valley, a monument to the decision that had almost cost her everything and saved them all. Hands reached out from the cabin. Kincaid and the medic grabbed their vests, hauling them inside the bird. They collapsed onto the metal floor in a heap of tangled limbs and gear. "Go, go, go!" Kincaid slammed the door shut. The Black Hawk banked hard, diving into the valley to pick up speed. The G-force pressed Selena into the floor, but for the first time in 48 hours, she didn't fight it. She looked up. Miller was sitting opposite her, unclipping from the hoist. He wiped dust from his goggles, then looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke. He just nodded, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. She nodded back. She wasn't a tourist anymore. She was havoc. The war ended at the door of the medical tent. Inside, the air was refrigerated and smelled aggressively of iodine and bleach. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the dust, blood, and cordite that had filled Selena's lungs for the last 12 hours. Staff Sergeant Selena Vance sat on the edge of a stainless steel exam table, her legs dangling. Her left sleeve had been cut away, revealing the angry, jagged laceration on her tricep. An exhausted Navy corpsman was finishing the last of the sutures, tying off the black thread with mechanical precision. "You're lucky, Sergeant," the corpsman mumbled, snipping the thread. "Another inch to the right and that rock would have severed the nerve. You'd be shooting left-handed for the rest of your life." "I shoot ambidextrous," Selena said quietly. The corpsman paused, looked at her, and shook his head. "Right, of course you do." He slapped a bandage over the E, wound, and walked away. Selena didn't move. She stared at the white tile floor, listening to the hum of the generator outside. Her adrenaline had crashed an hour ago, leaving her hollowed out and shivering. The door opened. It wasn't the corpsman. A major from JAG entered, followed by a frantic-looking intelligence officer. The major held a clipboard like a weapon. He didn't look like he had been outside the wire in months. Clean uniform, clean fingernails. "Staff Sergeant Vance," the major started, skipping the pleasantries. "We're conducting an immediate preliminary inquiry into the events at Grid 4429, specifically the destruction of the Almere Municipal Water Tower." Selena looked up, her eyes narrowing. "It was a tactical necessity, sir. It was a $50,000 piece of infrastructure funded by the State Department," the major countered, tapping the clipboard. "And according to the initial logs, you fired without a direct request from the ground force commander. You dropped a building on a friendly element's egress route. That looks like panic, Sergeant. That looks like negligence." Selena felt the heat rise in her neck. "I didn't panic. I denied the enemy a mobility kill." "You blocked the extraction road," the major pressed. "The team was forced to scramble up a cliff face under fire because of your shot. If Lieutenant Kincaid files a complaint, he won't." The voice came from the doorway. It was a low, gravelly sound that stopped the major mid-sentence. Lieutenant Kincaid stood there. He was still wearing his combat pants, covered in dust and dried mud. His face was smeared with camo paint, but his eyes were clear. He walked into the room, limping slightly, holding a ruggedized tablet. "Lieutenant," the major stiffened, "I'm just getting the sergeant's statement regarding the incident." "There is no incident," Kincaid said, tossing the tablet onto the metal table with a clatter. "That's the drone feed from the EOD sweep of the South Alley. Look at it." The major picked up the tablet. Selina watched his face. He squinted, then paled. 6 pressure plates, Kincaid said, his voice hard. "Buried in the tire ruts exactly where we were heading. Daisy-chained to 3 150mm artillery shells. If Vance hadn't dropped that tower and blocked us, Havoc team would be coming home in sandwich bags right now." The room went silent. The hum of the lights seemed to get louder. The major set the tablet down slowly. He looked at Selina, then back at the tablet. The narrative of reckless female soldier had just disintegrated in the face of hard data. "I see," the major cleared his throat. "Well, that changes the context. We'll mark it as a justified engagement." "You'll mark it as a save," Kincaid corrected him. "And then you'll let my shooter get some sleep." The major nodded stiffly, gathered his papers, and retreated from the room. Kincaid stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them. He looked at Selina's bandaged arm. "How's the arm?" "It'll hold," Selina said. Kincaid nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He tossed it to her. Selina caught it with her good hand. It was the spent brass casing of a .338 round. Her round. The one that dropped the tower. "Miller dug that out of the dirt before we loaded up," Kincaid said. "Figured you might want it." Selina turned the heavy brass casing over in her fingers. It was still warm. "You disobeyed a direct order to hold fire," Kincaid said, crossing his arms, but there was no bite in his voice. "I followed the mission," Selina replied, meeting his gaze. "Preservation of the force." Kincaid let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Yeah, you did." He paused, looking at the floor, then back at her. "Next time, Vance, warn us before you bring the sky down. Next time, listen to me when I say it's a trap." Kincaid smiled. It was a small, tired thing, but it was real. "Deal." He turned and walked out, stopping at the doorframe. "Chow is in 20 mics. Miller saved you a seat. Don't be late." The door swung shut. Selina sat alone in the sterile light. She gripped the brass casing tight in her hand until the metal bit into her palm. She didn't need a medal. She didn't need a parade. She had 6 men breathing air they shouldn't be breathing. She slid off the table, picked up her gear, and began to clean her rifle.